The silence struck like a blade through silk. Sorrel Ashwell stood in the shadowed alcove beside the marble pillar, her fingers frozen around the empty glass she'd been pretending to sip from for the past hour. She was not supposed to be noticed. She was never supposed to be noticed. That was the entire purpose of her existence in rooms like this, to blend into the wallpaper, to hold Lady Philomena's wrap, to nod at appropriate moments and vanish when no longer needed. But the Duke of Ashworth was staring directly at her. No, that wasn't possible. Sorrel blinked, certain she'd misunderstood. The candlelight was playing tricks. He was looking at someone behind her, perhaps, or past her, toward the servants' entrance. Except there was no one behind her. Just cold marble and the velvet drapes she'd been hiding beside for the better part of 2 hours. "Her," the Duke repeated, his voice cutting through the horrified murmurs rippling through the ballroom. "The one standing by the third pillar. The one you've all been looking straight through all evening." 300 pairs of eyes turned toward Sorrel with the synchronized precision of a firing squad. Her stomach plummeted through the floor. This was the Ashworth selection, the most anticipated event of the season, whispered about in every drawing room from London to Edinburgh. The notoriously unmarried Duke of Ashworth had finally agreed to choose a bride, and his formidable grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Letitia, had assembled the 10 most eligible noble daughters in all of England for his consideration. 10 ladies of impeccable breeding, vast fortunes, and connections that stretched to the highest reaches of society. 10 silk gowns worth more than Sorrel's family would earn in a decade. 10 carefully rehearsed smiles that had faltered one by one as the Duke dismissed each candidate with cool, surgical precision. Lady Philomena Hurst had been 8th. She'd emerged from her private audience with the Duke pale as milk and trembling with fury, snatching her wrap from Sorrel's hands without a word. Sorrel had assumed her duties for the evening were concluded. She'd been counting the minutes until she could slip away. She had not anticipated this. "Your Grace," the Dowager Duchess's voice sliced through the chaos, sharp with barely contained rage. "This is highly irregular." "Is it?" The Duke descended the 3 steps from the raised dais where he'd conducted his interviews, each footfall echoing in the stunned silence. "I was told to choose. I've chosen." He moved through the crowd, which parted before him like water around stone. He was tall, taller than Sorrel had realized when she'd glimpsed him from across ballrooms, always distant, always untouchable. Dark hair swept back from a face that might have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and colder assessment. His eyes were the gray of winter storms, and right now they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the marble at her back. "I don't understand," Sorrel heard herself say, the words emerging thin and reedy. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "I'm not. I'm no one. I'm Lady Philomena's companion. I'm aware of who you are, Miss Ashwell." The way he said her name stopped her breath. He knew her name. How did he know her name? Companions weren't introduced. Companions didn't have names that mattered. Companions existed to fade into background like furniture, useful and invisible. "This is absurd." Lady Philomena pushed forward, her beautiful face twisted with disbelief. "Tavish, you cannot seriously mean to choose my companion over me, over any of us. She's nobody. Her family is nothing. Her father gambled away their estate when she was barely 15. Every word landed like a slap, true and terrible. Sorrel felt her face burn, shame crawling up her throat. This was the nightmare she'd always dreaded. Exposure, humiliation, the careful mask of invisibility ripped away to reveal the poverty and desperation beneath. "Lady Philomena!" The Duke's voice could have frozen fire. "I recall dismissing you 20 minutes ago. Has something changed?" Philomena's mouth opened, then closed. Her cheeks flushed crimson. "Miss Ashwell." The Duke turned back to Sorrel, extending one gloved hand with formal precision. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to explain the misunderstanding, to flee through the servants' entrance and never look back. But 300 people were watching. The Dowager Duchess's eyes bore into her with the heat of contained fury. Lady Philomena looked ready to commit murder, and the Duke's hand remained extended, patient as stone. Sorrel took it. His fingers closed around hers with surprising warmth, guiding her forward through the crowd. She felt like a ghost given sudden form. People who had looked straight through her for months now stared with naked shock, with outrage, with the particular venom reserved for those who disrupted the natural order of things. He led her through the ballroom's side doors onto a moonlit terrace, finally releasing her hand only when they were alone, the hum of scandalized whispers fading behind them. "You're shaking," he observed. "You've just made me the most hated woman in London." Sorrel wrapped her arms around herself, the night air cold against her bare shoulders. Her gown, dove gray silk, plain but clean, purchased second-hand 3 seasons ago, suddenly felt like sackcloth. Every noble family in that room wanted their daughter chosen. You rejected all of them and pointed at the help. You're not the help. You're a gentleman's daughter fallen on misfortune. You know a great deal about me, Your Grace, considering we've never been introduced. A flicker crossed his face, surprise, perhaps, or respect. You're direct. Good. I despise equivocation. And I despise being made a spectacle without explanation. The words escaped before she could stop them. Sorrel pressed her lips together, horrified by her own boldness. She was nobody. She had no right to speak to a duke this way. She had no right to speak to a duke at all. But something in his expression had changed, subtle but unmistakable, a ghost of approval in the hard line of his jaw. "You want an explanation? I want to understand why you've just destroyed my life." "Destroyed it?" His eyebrow arched. "I've offered you a dukedom. You've offered me scandal. I'm a companion, Your Grace. After tonight, no respectable family will employ me. Lady Philomena will ensure that. Whatever game you're playing, I'll be the one who pays when it ends." For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, sharp with tension. Behind them, the ballroom hummed with what Sorrel knew would be vicious speculation. Ahead lay only darkness and the unfamiliar terrain of a life upended. "Miss Ashwell," his voice dropped, losing its formal edge for something rawer, more honest. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen very carefully." Sorrel met his eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I didn't choose you randomly." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a murmur only she could hear. "I chose you because you're the only person in that ballroom who sees what I see, the only one who might understand what I'm actually trying to do." "What are you trying to do?" The ghost of a smile crossed his face, there and gone like lightning. "I'm trying to destroy everything my family has built, and I need someone they'd never suspect to help me do it." Before Sorrel could respond, before she could even process the enormity of what he'd said, the terrace doors burst open. The Dowager Duchess swept through like a storm given form, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, her face carved from fury. "Inside," she commanded. "Both of you. Now, we are going to discuss this properly, away from prying eyes." Sorrel looked at the Duke. His expression had shuddered again, smooth and unreadable as glass. "Coming, grandmother," he said mildly. Then, so quietly only Sorrel could hear, "Trust nothing she tells you, and whatever you do, don't refuse her offer." What offer? But he was already moving. following the dowager back into the glittering viper's nest of the ballroom. Sorrel had no choice but to follow, her mind racing, her heart pounding, and the Duke's impossible words echoing through her thoughts. I'm trying to destroy everything my family has built. What had she just walked into? The dowager's private parlor was colder than the terrace, not in temperature. A fire blazed in the hearth, filling the room with dancing shadows, but in atmosphere. Every surface gleamed with polish and perfection. Every piece of furniture spoke of wealth accumulated over centuries, and at the center of it all sat Letitia Sinclair, Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, watching Sorrel with eyes that missed nothing. "Sit." Sorrel sat. The chair was harder than it looked. The Duke remained standing by the window, arms crossed, and his face reflecting nothing. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the terrace, and Sorrel couldn't tell if his silence was strategy or warning. "So," the dowager steepled her fingers, "you are the creature my grandson has chosen to humiliate us with." Sorrel's spine stiffened. "With respect, Your Grace, I didn't ask to be chosen." "No, but you didn't refuse either." The dowager's lips curved without warmth. "You walked through that ballroom on his arm. You let yourself be seen." "I wasn't given the option to decline gracefully. There's always an option to decline. You simply didn't take it." The dowager leaned forward, her gaze sharpening. "Which tells me something interesting about you, Miss Ashwell. You're either desperate enough to seize any opportunity or clever enough to recognize one when it's offered." "I'm neither, Your Grace. I'm merely confused." "Don't play coy. It doesn't suit you." The dowager rose, moving toward the fireplace with predatory grace. "I've made inquiries about you. Your father was Reginald Ashwell of Thornbury. Respectable family, reasonable connections, a promising future, until he developed an unfortunate fondness for cards and horses and other men's wives. He lost everything when you were barely 15. Your mother died of fever 3 years later. You have a younger brother currently drowning in his own debts, somewhere in the gambling halls of London. You've been selling your education and good manners as a companion for 4 years to keep yourself fed and your brother out of prison." Each fact landed like a blow. Sorrel kept her face still, refusing to show how deeply the words cut. "You've done thorough research, Your Grace." "I do thorough research on everyone who enters my grandson's orbit." The dowager turned, firelight casting half her face in shadow. "What I haven't determined yet is whether you're an opportunist who engineered this somehow, or a genuine innocent caught in my grandson's latest scheme. I assure you, I engineered nothing. Then Tavish chose you deliberately." The dowager's gaze slid to her grandson, which raises the question of why. The Duke stirred at the window. "Does it matter? I've made my choice. The selection is concluded." "The selection is not concluded until I say it's concluded." Steel rang beneath the dowager's words. "You rejected 10 of the finest families in England tonight. Tavish, 10 alliances, 10 fortunes, 10 daughters whose mothers will never forgive this insult. For what? A penniless orphan with a drunkard for a father and a wastrel for a brother? For someone who doesn't bore me senseless within 5 minutes of conversation," the Duke replied coolly. "That alone makes her more suitable than any of your precious candidates. You're doing this to spite me. I'm doing this because I refuse to marry a stranger chosen for her bloodlines like a prize mare at auction. You gave me a choice. I made one. Accept it, or release me from this farce entirely." The temperature in the room dropped another degree. Sorrel watched the two of them lock gazes, wills clashing with almost audible force. This was a battle far older than tonight. Years of conflict compressed into a single moment. She should stay silent. She should let them fight it out. Whatever game they were playing, it wasn't her concern. But the words escaped anyway. Perhaps, she said quietly. Someone might ask what I want. Both heads turned toward her with identical expressions of surprise, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken. Sorrel rose from her uncomfortable chair, drawing herself to her full height. It wasn't much. She barely reached the Duke's shoulder, but she refused to cower. You've discussed my father, my brother, and my circumstances. You've speculated on my motives and debated my suitability. But neither of you has bothered to ask whether I have any interest in this arrangement whatsoever. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. You're a penniless companion, Miss Ashwell. What possible objection could you have to becoming a duchess? Several, actually. Sorrel met her gaze steadily. First, I don't know your grandson. I exchanged perhaps 30 sentences with him before being dragged in here. Second, I have no desire to be a weapon in whatever war exists between you. Third, and most importantly, I have a life, modest though it may be, that I've built for myself. I won't be manipulated into destroying it for someone else's agenda. Silence followed. The fire crackled. Then, impossibly, the Dowager laughed. It wasn't a warm sound, but it held genuine surprise, perhaps even admiration. Well, she said, you do have spine, Miss Ashwell. I wondered if you might. She reminds me of Mother, the Duke said quietly. The Dowager stilled. Something moved across her face. Grief, or memory, or both, before her expression smoothed back into control. Don't use your mother to manipulate me, Tavish. I'm not manipulating. I'm observing. He moved from the window, coming to stand beside Sorrel. You want to know why I chose her, grandmother? Because every other woman in that ballroom wanted the title, the wealth, the status. Miss Ashwell wants none of those things. She'd walk out that door right now if we let her. And that appeals to you? That intrigues me. His gaze slid to Sorrel. Someone who doesn't want what I can offer is someone who might actually be honest with me. Do you have any idea how rare honesty is in my world, grandmother? The Dowager studied them both for a long moment. Very well, she said finally. Miss Ashwell, I will offer you a proposition. Not marriage. Not yet. But a trial. Come to Ashworth Manor for the remainder of the season. You will be presented as a guest of the family, a distant connection being introduced to society. If you and my grandson suit, we will discuss a formal arrangement. If you don't suit, you will leave with generous references that will secure you a position far better than companion to Philomena Hurst. Sorrel's heart quickened. It was more than she could have dreamed, far more than she deserved. But the Duke's words echoed in her mind. Trust nothing she tells you. And if I refuse? The Dowager's smile sharpened. Then, you return to Lady Philomena's service tonight and face whatever consequences await. I'm told she can be quite vindictive when crossed. It wasn't really a choice at all. Sorrel looked at the Duke, searching for some sign, some guidance. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'll need 3 conditions, Sorrel heard herself say. The Dowager's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with me? If I'm walking into a lion's den, Your Grace, I'd like to know where the exits are. Another surprised laugh. Name your conditions, Miss Ashwell, quickly, before I change my mind about this entire arrangement. Ashworth Manor rose from the morning mist, like something from a fever dream. Sorrel pressed her face to the carriage window, watching the estate materialize from shadow into substance. Towers of pale stone, rows of gleaming windows, grounds that stretched farther than she could see. It was beautiful in the way that mountains were beautiful, or oceans, vast and indifferent, and utterly beyond her comprehension. It's much less intimidating once you're inside, Corinna Sinclair offered cheerfully from the opposite seat. She was the Duke's younger sister, barely 20, with chestnut hair and warm brown eyes that held none of her grandmother's coldness. She'd arrived at the Dowager's townhouse at dawn, with a trunk of borrowed dresses and an enthusiasm that bordered on alarming. Well, perhaps not much less intimidating, but the East Wing is quite cozy once you get used to it. Cozy, Sorrel repeated faintly. Relatively speaking, Corinna grinned. There are only 47 rooms in the East Wing. 47 rooms. Sorrel's entire childhood home could have fit into the entrance hall she could see looming ahead. She pressed her hands together in her lap, willing them to stop trembling. The previous evening felt like a dream. She'd negotiated her 3 conditions with the Dowager: a letter to her brother explaining her absence, written confirmation that her reputation would remain intact, regardless of outcome, and the Dowager's personal guarantee of references when this arrangement concluded. The old woman had agreed to all 3 with suspicious ease, then dismissed her to a guest room more luxurious than anywhere Sorrel had ever slept. She hadn't seen the Duke again. He'd vanished into the London night with a murmured, "Until tomorrow," and left her with nothing but questions. I'm trying to destroy everything my family has built. What did that mean? What destruction could a Duke possibly want? And why would he need her to accomplish it? The carriage rolled to a stop. Footmen materialized, as if from thin air, opening doors, lowering steps, reaching for luggage Sorrel didn't have. Her single-worn valise looked painfully inadequate beside Corinna's 3 traveling trunks. "Welcome to Ashworth Manor, miss." The housekeeper was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and a face that gave away nothing. "I'm Mrs. Compton. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms." Rooms. Plural. Sorrel followed her into a world she didn't belong in. The entrance hall alone could have housed a cathedral. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching from gilded frames. Every surface gleamed with polish, accumulated over centuries. Every detail whispered of wealth so old it had become invisible to those who possessed it. Sorrel felt like a stain on clean linen. "Your suite is in the East Wing," Mrs. Compton continued, leading her up a sweeping staircase. "Lady Corinna's rooms are adjacent. You'll share a sitting room." "That way you won't get lost," Corinna added helpfully. "I got lost constantly my first year here. Once spent 4 hours trying to find the breakfast room and ended up in the conservatory instead. The orchids were lovely, but not very filling." Despite everything, Sorrel felt her lips twitch. The suite was absurd. A bedroom larger than her family's entire apartment, decorated in shades of soft blue and cream. A private dressing room with wardrobes built into the walls. The sitting room Corinna had mentioned, with windows overlooking gardens that seemed to stretch into forever. A writing desk by the window, already stocked with paper and ink. "Your maid will be Nelda," Mrs. Compton informed her. "She'll attend you while you're with us. Luncheon is served at 1, dinner at 8. His Grace takes breakfast early, but you may have a tray sent up if you prefer." His Grace. The Duke. Does he take meals with the family? Something flickered across Mrs. Compton's impassive face. Occasionally, His Grace keeps irregular hours. She departed with a crisp nod, leaving Sorrel alone in her borrowed luxury. Corinna had promised to return after changing from her traveling clothes, giving Sorrel a moment of solitude she desperately needed. She crossed to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the garden sprawled in geometric perfection, hedges trimmed to mathematical precision, flower beds arranged in patterns too deliberate for nature. A fountain glittered in the distance. Beyond it, woods stretched toward the horizon, dark and wild in contrast to the cultivated grounds. This was her life now, at least for the next several months. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Ashwell." A young woman entered, perhaps 19, with red hair tucked under a white cap and kind eyes that reminded Sorrel of her mother's old cook. "I'm Nelda. I've been assigned as your lady's maid." "You don't need to—" Sorrel stopped herself. Refusing a maid would cause comment, would mark her as different, difficult, and not belonging. "Thank you, Nelda. I appreciate it." The girl smiled, some tension easing from her shoulders. "I've drawn a bath for you, miss, and laid out a dress for this afternoon. Lady Corinna had it sent up special. She said you'd want something comfortable after traveling." Sorrel looked at the dress draped across the bed. Pale yellow muslin, simply cut, but beautifully made, more expensive than anything she'd ever owned. "That's very kind of her. Lady Corinna's always kind." Nelda moved to help Sorrel with her buttons. "This whole house has been different since the old Duke passed. Quieter. Lady Corinna tries, but His Grace—" She trailed off, pressing her lips together. "His Grace what?" Nelda hesitated. "He keeps to himself, miss. Works all hours. Barely speaks to anyone except at mealtimes. Mrs. Compton says he wasn't always like this. But grief changes people, doesn't it?" Grief. Of course. Sorrel remembered the Dowager's reaction when the Duke mentioned his mother. The flash of something raw beneath the old woman's iron control. What had this family lost? And what did any of it have to do with the Duke's cryptic words on the terrace? "What was the old Duke like?" Sorrel asked carefully. But before Nelda could answer, another knock sounded. Corinna swept in without waiting for a response, her eyes bright with excitement. "You're still in your traveling clothes. Quickly, quickly. Tavish wants to see you in the library before luncheon. He says it's important." She paused, something flickering across her face. "He also says to tell you. Remember what he said about grandmother's offer." Trust nothing she tells you. Sorrel's stomach tightened. What exactly am I walking into, Corinna? But the girl just smiled, something complicated moving behind her cheerful expression. "That's what Tavish wants to explain. Come, he doesn't like to be kept waiting." And beneath the warmth in her voice, Sorrel heard a warning she couldn't quite decode. The library smelled of secrets. Old leather, wood smoke, and something deeper. The particular mustiness of books that had been read and reread over generations. Sorrel paused in the doorway, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it. Shelves climbed 3 stories high, accessible by rolling ladders and narrow walkways. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. And in the center of it all stood Tavish Sinclair, Duke of Ashworth, looking nothing like the cold aristocrat from the ballroom. His jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He stood before a massive desk covered in papers, maps, and what appeared to be financial ledgers, his attention so focused he didn't notice her entrance. "You wanted to see me, Your Grace?" He looked up sharply, something unguarded flashing across his face before his expression smoothed into careful neutrality. "Miss Ashwell, close the door." She did, hyper-aware of the impropriety. Alone with the Duke in his private library. If anyone discovered them, her reputation, such as it remained, would be shattered beyond repair. "I owe you an explanation," he said without preamble. "What I said on the terrace last night, it wasn't meant to frighten you." "It didn't frighten me. It confused me." Sorrel moved deeper into the room, drawn by curiosity despite her caution. "You said you wanted to destroy everything your family has built. That's a rather dramatic statement from a man who stands to inherit one of the largest estates in England." Inherit. He spoke the word like a curse. "Yes, that's precisely the problem." He gestured to the papers spread across his desk. Sorrel approached, looking down at columns of numbers, names, dates, Accounts of some kind, though she couldn't immediately decipher their meaning. What am I looking at? Proof. His jaw tightened. Proof that my family's fortune, the estate, the investments, the trade connections that fund everything you see around you, was built on suffering. Sorrel's breath caught. What kind of suffering? The kind that history prefers to forget. Tavish pulled a ledger from the pile, opening it to a page marked with a red ribbon. My great-grandfather made his fortune in the Caribbean, sugar plantations. The records are detailed. She didn't need him to explain further. The weight of it settled over her like a shroud. The beautiful manor, the gleaming silver, the generations of luxury, all funded by human misery, by chains and whips and lives stolen. Does your grandmother know? My grandmother helped hide it. Bitterness sharpened his voice. When my father discovered these records 5 years ago, he wanted to make amends. Sell the Caribbean holdings, establish funds for the descendants of those who were enslaved, publicly acknowledge the source of our wealth. My grandmother convinced him to wait, to be strategic. And then he died, and I inherited. And she's been trying to marry me off to someone pliable ever since. Someone who won't ask questions. Someone who won't care about the answers. His gray eyes met hers. Lady Philomena would have been perfect, beautiful, ambitious, utterly indifferent to anything beyond her own advancement. Any of those 10 candidates would have served my grandmother's purposes. They would have produced heirs, hosted parties, and never once wondered why the family chapel has no windows facing west. Why doesn't it? Because that's where my great-grandfather is buried, and my grandmother doesn't want anyone looking too closely at his grave. Sorrel's mind raced. This was so much larger than a simple marriage arrangement, so much more dangerous than social scandal. Why tell me this? You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me. I have every reason to trust you. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I've been watching you for months, Miss Ashwell. Not personally. I have people who observe, who report. You've served Lady Philomena for 2 years. In that time, she's treated you abominably, humiliated you publicly, and blamed you for her own failures. And not once have you retaliated. Not once have you used the secrets you've overheard against her. I'm not a gossip. You're not corruptible. There's a difference. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. My grandmother will try to buy you. She'll offer money, position, a future beyond anything you've dreamed. And when that fails, she'll threaten you. She'll dig up every shameful secret your family possesses and hold them over your head. She already has. That was just the beginning. He reached out, his fingers brushing her elbow. The lightest touch, barely contact at all, yet it sent electricity racing through her. I need someone who will stand with me when I expose the truth. Someone society can't dismiss as a disgruntled servant or a fortune hunter. Someone who appears exactly as my grandmother wants, a suitable match, a respectable choice, while actually being the instrument of her undoing. You want to use me. I want to work with you. There's a difference, he released her, stepping back. You set conditions with my grandmother. I'll set one with you. Help me bring this to light, and when it's done, I'll give you anything you want. Freedom, fortune, passage to anywhere in the world. You'll never need to depend on anyone's charity again. It was everything she'd ever wanted. Independence, security, a future she controlled. So why did something in his offer feel like a trap? Before she could respond, the library door burst open. Ah, the dowager swept in, her silver cane clicking against the marble floor. Having private conversations already, I see. How delightfully scandalous. Tavish's expression shuddered. Grandmother, I wasn't expecting you until dinner. Clearly. Her gaze swept over the papers on his desk, and something tightened around her eyes. Still playing with your father's obsessions, I see. I thought we discussed this. You lectured. I ignored you. That's not quite the same as discussion. The temperature in the room plummeted. Sorrel found herself caught between them, feeling the weight of years of conflict in every charged silence. This discussion requires privacy, the Dowager said, her tone brooking no argument. Both of you. With me. Now. She led them through a side door, then paused in the corridor, turning to Sorrel with a smile sharp as broken glass. Miss Ashwell, you and I will walk in the garden. Tavish can entertain himself with his research. It wasn't a request. Sorrel glanced at Tavish, remembering his warning. Trust nothing she tells you. But she couldn't refuse without causing a scene, without revealing that he'd already warned her against his grandmother. Of course, Your Grace, she said smoothly. I'd be honored. As she followed the Dowager toward the garden doors, she felt Tavish's gaze burning into her back, and beneath her calm exterior, her pulse quickened with a single desperate question. Whose side am I supposed to be on? The Dowager's interrogation lasted 3 hours. They walked the gardens, all 17 acres of them, while Letitia Sinclair extracted every detail of Sorrel's life with surgical precision. Her childhood before the fall, her mother's illness, her father's descent into shame and silence, the years of service, the small humiliations, the dreams she'd abandoned one by one, like children she couldn't afford to feed. By the time they returned to the manor, Sorrel felt flayed open. You'll do, the Dowager pronounced, settling into a chair in her private sitting room. You're not as foolish as I feared, and you have enough pride to be useful. Useful for what, Your Grace? For managing my grandson. The old woman's eyes glittered. Tavish is brilliant, but unstable. He has ideas, dangerous ideas about responsibility and restitution and other modern nonsense. His father filled his head with guilt, and now he's determined to tear down everything our family has built. Sorrel kept her expression neutral. I'm not certain I understand. You understand perfectly. He's already told you, hasn't he? About the Caribbean holdings, about his grand plan to expose our family's history to public scrutiny. The Dowager waved a dismissive hand. It's performative guilt from a young man who's never had to struggle for anything. Easy to condemn the past when you're living comfortably on its proceeds. Perhaps he simply wants to do what's right. What's right? The Dowager laughed, cold and sharp. What's right is preserving the legacy his ancestors built. What's right is securing the future of this estate for generations to come. What's right is ensuring that the Ashworth name remains synonymous with power and influence, not scandal and self-flagellation. And what do you want from me, Your Grace? I want you to be a stabilizing influence. The Dowager leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Marry him. Give him heirs. Distract him from his crusade with domestic happiness. Let him play at righteousness in private while maintaining respectability in public. That's what a duchess does, Miss Ashwell. She protects the family name. It was exactly what Tavish had predicted, the offer of position, of power, in exchange for complicity. And if I can't distract him, then you'll have failed, and you'll return to obscurity with nothing. The Dowager smiled without warmth. But you won't fail. You're hungry, Miss Ashwell. I can see it in your eyes. You want what I'm offering more than you want to admit. The question is simply whether you're clever enough to take it. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of fittings, lessons, and careful observation. Madame Laurent arrived from London with trunks of fabric and an army of seamstresses. Sorrel stood for hours while they measured, pinned, and draped, transforming her into something she didn't recognize. Corinna supervised with enthusiasm, selecting colors and styles that somehow made Sorel look elegant rather than costumed. "You have excellent bones," Madame Laurent declared. "Good posture. We can work with this." The dancing master came next, a terrifying Prussian named Herr Kessler, who shouted corrections in 3 languages and threatened to quit 14 times in a single afternoon. Sorel learned the waltz, the quadrille, the cotillion, drilling the steps until her feet ached and her dreams were filled with counting. Through it all, Tavish remained absent. He appeared at dinners, seated at the head of the long table, exchanging cool pleasantries with his grandmother, while Corinna chattered enough to fill the silences. He inquired politely about Sorel's progress, approved her gown selections with distant nods, and retreated to his study the moment the meal concluded. It shouldn't have bothered her. This was an arrangement, not a courtship. His attention wasn't required, but she found herself watching for him anyway, noticing when his study light burned past midnight, wondering what secrets he was unearthing in those endless hours alone. On the 7th night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered the darkened hallways of the East Wing, her borrowed dressing gown trailing behind her. The manor at night felt different, older, heavier, full of shadows that seemed to breathe. She found herself drawn toward the library without consciously deciding to go there. The door was ajar. Warm light spilled into the corridor. She should return to her room, should pretend she hadn't noticed. But curiosity pulled her forward, and she pushed the door open to find Tavish slumped in a leather chair, a glass of brandy untouched beside him, staring at nothing. "You should be asleep," he said without looking up. "So should you." "I don't sleep well." He gestured vaguely at the empty chair across from him. "Sit if you're going to hover." She sat. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across his face. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tension carved into every line of his posture. "Your grandmother made me an offer," Sorel said quietly. "I assumed she would. She wants me to distract you, to be a stabilizing influence." She paused. "To make you forget your crusade in exchange for domestic happiness." Something moved behind his eyes. "And what did you tell her?" "Nothing. I listened." Sorel met his gaze. "I'm still deciding whose side I'm on." "Fair enough." He reached for his brandy, then stopped. "My father used to sit in this chair. Every night after dinner, he'd come here and read until the fire died. He said it was the only time the house felt peaceful. You miss him. I miss who he was before he discovered the truth, before the guilt ate him alive." Tavish's voice roughened. He wanted to make amends, to do what was right, and he died before he could see it through. Now his unfinished business is mine, and some days the weight of it. He stopped, jaw tightening. "Some days it what?" Sorel pressed gently. "Some days, I don't know if I'm honoring his memory or trying to escape it." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. This was not the controlled Duke from the ballroom. This was a man drowning in inherited grief, searching for solid ground. Sorel reached out, her fingers brushing his hand where it rested on the chair arm. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you don't have to do it alone." He looked at her then, really looked, the walls behind his eyes cracking just enough to show the exhaustion and loneliness beneath. "Why do you care? You barely know me." "I know enough." She withdrew her hand, the ghost of his warmth lingering on her skin. "I know you're trying to right a terrible wrong. I know it's costing you more than you admit. And I know your grandmother is wrong about you." "Is she?" "You're not unstable, Your Grace. You're just the only one in this house brave enough to feel ashamed." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Then Tavish reached into his jacket and withdrew a small package, wrapped in brown paper. I found this in my father's desk. He'd meant to give it to my mother, but she died before their anniversary. He pressed it into Sorrel's hands. I want you to have it. She unwrapped it carefully to find a cameo brooch, a woman's profile carved in ivory, set in gold filigree, simple but exquisite. I can't accept this. You can. You will. His eyes held hers. Consider it a promise. When this is over, when the truth is exposed, and my grandmother's schemes are undone, you won't have to accept anyone's offers. You'll be free to choose your own path. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever given her, and as she walked back to her room, the brooch clutched against her heart. Sorrel realized something terrifying. She wasn't performing anymore. She was starting to care. The Ashworth Spring Ball was legendary. 300 guests, an orchestra imported from Vienna, champagne flowing like water, and enough candles to illuminate a small city. Every powerful family in England had sent representatives, drawn by curiosity about the Duke's mysterious new attachment and the promise of scandal worth discussing for months. Sorrel stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The gown was midnight blue silk, shot through with silver threads that caught the light like captured stars. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement, the cameo brooch Tavish had given her pinned at her throat. Diamond drops borrowed from Corinna sparkled at her ears. She looked like a duchess. The thought made her stomach clench. Breathe, Corinna instructed, adjusting a final curl. You're going to be magnificent. Everyone will be watching, but that's the point. We want them watching. And if I make a fool of myself, then I'll create a bigger scene to distract them. I'm very good at scenes. Corinna grinned. Ready? No, she wasn't ready. She would never be ready. But she nodded anyway and let Corinna lead her toward the grand staircase. The ballroom was a fantasy of light and music. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting prismatic rainbows across the crowd below. Women in jewel-toned gowns swirled past men in immaculate evening dress. The orchestra played something elegant and soaring, and everywhere, eyes turned toward the staircase as Sorrel descended. The whispers began immediately. That's her, the companion he chose over Lady Philomena. No fortune, no connections, nothing but a pretty face. The dowager must be beside herself. Sorrel kept her chin high, her expression serene, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was a fraud, an imposter. Any moment now, someone would point and laugh, and the dream would shatter. Then Tavish appeared at the base of the stairs. He was devastating in black evening wear, his dark hair swept back, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He extended his hand, with formal precision, but something in his gaze was anything but formal. Miss Ashwell. His voice carried just far enough for the nearest observers to hear. You honor us with your presence. She placed her hand in his, felt his fingers close around hers with reassuring warmth. Your Grace. The first waltz, he murmured as he led her toward the dance floor. After that, the vultures will descend. But for these few minutes, we're untouchable. The orchestra shifted into a waltz. Tavish guided her into position, his hand at her waist, her palm pressed to his, their bodies closer than propriety strictly allowed. Around them, other couples took their places, but Sorrel was aware only of him. Don't think, he said quietly. Just follow. She tried, but it was impossible not to think when he held her this close, when his hand burned warm through the silk at her waist, when every turn brought them closer, then swept them apart, an intimate conversation conducted entirely in movement. They're watching, she whispered. Let them watch. His grip tightened slightly. Let them see exactly what they're dealing with. And what are they dealing with? A woman who frightens them. His eyes held hers as they turned. You don't realize, do you? The noble daughters they paraded before me. They're decorative, accomplished in the ways that society values, but utterly interchangeable. You're different. You've survived things that would have destroyed them. That's not frightening. That's just desperation. It's strength, and strength in a woman terrifies small men. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Remember that, when they come for you tonight. You've already survived worse than anything they can do. The waltz ended. He released her with careful correctness, bowing over her hand, and then the vultures descended. Lady Philomena was first, sweeping toward them in crimson silk that made her look like a bloodstain on the pristine ballroom. Your Grace, Miss Ashwell. Her smile was poisonous honey. What a transformation. One would almost believe you belonged here. One would almost believe you'd learned graciousness since our last meeting, Sorrel replied evenly. It seems we're both destined for disappointment. Lady Philomena's eyes narrowed. Before she could respond, another woman appeared at her elbow, older, sharper featured, and draped in sapphires that matched her cold blue gaze. Tavish, darling. She kissed the air near his cheek. Aren't you going to introduce me to your guest? Lady Margrave. Tavish's voice cooled several degrees. May I present Miss Sorrel Ashwell? Miss Ashwell, the Countess of Margrave, my mother's sister. His aunt. The woman studied Sorrel like a specimen under glass. So you're the one causing all the fuss. I must say, I expected something more remarkable. And I expected something more original than petty condescension. Sorrel smiled sweetly. We can't all exceed expectations, I suppose. The Countess blinked, clearly unaccustomed to resistance. Lady Philomena looked delighted by the confrontation, already cataloging details to spread as gossip. Careful, Miss Ashwell. Lady Margrave's voice dropped to a hiss. You may have charmed my nephew, but you haven't charmed this family. We know exactly what you are. A fortune hunter dressed in borrowed silk. Then you should feel quite comfortable with me. After all, your own fortune came from a marriage, did it not? To a man 30 years your senior, who conveniently died before your 3rd anniversary. Silence crashed like thunder. Lady Margrave's face went white, then red. Her hand twitched, as if she longed to strike. But too many eyes were watching. Too many witnesses to any violence. You'll regret this, she breathed. Both of you. Mark my words. She swept away, Lady Philomena trailing behind like a loyal hound. Sorrel's hands were shaking, but she kept them clasped behind her back where no one could see. That, Tavish said quietly, was perhaps not wise. Was I supposed to stand there and accept her insults? Most people do. I'm not most people. Sorrel met his eyes. You said you chose me because I'm not corruptible. Did you think that meant I'd be easily cowed? Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've been fighting all your life. He offered his arm. Come. The garden terrace is quieter. I find I need air. They escaped through French doors onto a moonlit terrace, the music fading to a murmur behind them. The night air was cool against Sorrel's flushed skin, carrying the scent of roses and something wilder from the woods beyond. You handled yourself well in there, Tavish said, leaning against the stone balustrade. My aunt is formidable. Few people stand up to her. She reminds me of Lady Philomena, confident that her position makes her untouchable. Sorrel moved to stand beside him. But position is just another kind of armor. Underneath, she's as frightened as anyone else. Frightened of what? Of losing her place, of being exposed as ordinary. She glanced at him sideways. Of people like me, who have nothing left to lose. He was watching her with that intensity again, the moonlight casting half his face in shadow. You're not what I expected, Sorrel Ashwell. It was the first time he'd used her name without the formal Miss. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. What did you expect? Someone more careful, more calculating. He turned to face her fully. Someone who would play both sides until the safest choice became clear. I tried that. It felt like drowning. And now? She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how easily she could reach up and touch his face, how desperately she wanted to. Sorrel. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something about why I really chose you. Your grace. They sprang apart as Corinna burst onto the terrace, her face pale with alarm. You need to come inside. Now. Lady Margrave is making a scene. She's telling everyone about the Caribbean holdings, about the records. She's saying you're planning to destroy the family. Ice flooded Sorrel's veins. Tavish's expression went hard as stone. How did she know? Sorrel's mind raced. Lady Margrave had been part of the family's inner circle for decades, close enough to the Dowager to share confidences, close enough to have glimpsed the records Tavish had been studying. The betrayal came from within the family's trusted circle. I don't know, but grandmother is furious, and she's demanding to speak with both of you immediately. And, Corinna's voice cracked. She's saying Sorrel is behind it, that you brought her here specifically to help you expose the family, that this whole courtship is a scheme. Sorrel's world tilted sideways. The Dowager. Of course. The old woman had never trusted her, had been watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, we need to go, Tavish said grimly. Both of us. Now. But as they rushed back toward the ballroom, Sorrel couldn't shake the cold certainty settling in her chest. The trap had sprung, and she was caught directly in its teeth. The ballroom had become a battlefield. Sorrel stood frozen in the doorway, watching the carnage unfold. Lady Margrave held court near the orchestra, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd with theatrical precision. Around her, 300 guests listened, with the rapt attention of spectators at a public execution. Records dating back generations, Lady Margrave was saying. Proof of where the Ashworth fortune truly originated. And my nephew, rather than protecting his family's honor, has been plotting to expose it all. With the help of his companion. The word dripped with implication. Eyes turned toward Sorrel, hundreds of them, sharp with judgment, bright with scandal hunger. She felt stripped naked before them, every vulnerability exposed. This is a private family matter. The Dowager's voice cracked like a whip across the murmurs. Margrave, you forget yourself. I forget nothing, Letitia. You've spent years hiding the truth, and now your grandson threatens to unravel everything. The families here deserve to know what kind of man they're dealing with, what kind of woman he's brought into our midst. Enough. Tavish's voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sorrel and the staring crowd. His posture was rigid with controlled fury, but his voice remained deadly calm. You want to discuss family history, Aunt? Let's discuss it. He turned to face the assembled guests. My great-grandfather made his fortune through the labor of enslaved people. This is fact. The records exist. I've spent months verifying them. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Dowager's face went white. What I've been planning, Tavish continued, is not destruction, but restitution. Acknowledgement of the harm that funded our privilege. Investments in communities still suffering from the legacy of that exploitation. This is not scandal. It is responsibility. Responsibility, Lady Margrave laughed harshly. You'd drag our family name through the mud for some misguided sense of guilt. I'd drag it into the light. Tavish's eyes blazed. Where it belongs. Where every family that built their wealth on human suffering should be forced to stand. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice spoke. Well said, Your Grace. Sorrel turned to see an elderly man stepping forward, distinguished, white-haired, wearing the simple black of a clergyman rather than aristocratic finery. Bishop Alderton, someone whispered nearby. There are those of us, the bishop continued, who have long advocated for such accountability. If His Grace is willing to lead by example, the Church would be honored to support such efforts. The tide shifted. Not entirely. Many faces still showed shock, disgust, calculation. But enough. Enough that Lady Margrave's triumphant expression faltered. This discussion is concluded, the Dowager announced, her voice brittle as ice. The ball will continue. Those who wish to leave may do so. Those who wish to stay will refrain from further speculation. The orchestra, taking their cue, struck up a waltz. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed into awkward clusters. The immediate crisis had passed, but nothing was resolved. Tavish found her in the library an hour later. She'd fled there after the confrontation, needing the comfort of books and shadows, needing space to breathe. The ball continued somewhere below, but up here, surrounded by leather and dust, she could almost pretend none of it had happened. You shouldn't be alone, he said from the doorway. Neither should you. She didn't turn around. You just declared war on your entire family in front of 300 witnesses. I imagine there are conversations that need having. They can wait. He crossed the room, his footsteps soft on the carpet. Are you all right? I don't know. She finally faced him. In the low firelight, he looked as exhausted as she felt. Your aunt blamed me. She told everyone I was behind your plans. My aunt is a desperate woman protecting her own interests. No one who matters believed her. Everyone who matters believed her. That's the problem. Sorrel wrapped her arms around herself. Your grandmother, the society matrons, Lady Philomena, and all her poisonous friends. They'll never accept me now. They'll spend the rest of the season ensuring I'm ruined. Let them try. You can't protect me from all of them. You can't. Her voice cracked. I should never have come here. I should have refused that first night, taken my chances with Lady Philomena's wrath. At least then, I'd only have one enemy instead of an entire class of them. Sorrel. He was closer now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Look at me. She did, and the rawness in his expression stole her breath. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for putting you in this position, for not protecting you better, for every moment of tonight. It's not your fault. Your aunt, my aunt acted because I gave her ammunition, because I wasn't careful enough, because I was so focused on my own crusade that I forgot you'd be caught in the crossfire. His hand came up, hovering near her face without quite touching. You should hate me. I should, she swallowed. I don't. Why not? Because you're the first person in years who has seen me as something other than furniture. Because you trusted me with your deepest secrets when you had no reason to. Because... She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of how easy it would be to close the remaining distance. Because what? Because when you look at me, I feel like I matter. The words hung between them, naked and true. Then his hand completed its journey, cupping her face with a tenderness that made her ache. You matter, he said hoarsely. You matter more than any of this. More than the estate or the fortune, or my grandmother's approval. You're the first real thing I've felt since my father died, and I He stopped. His eyes searched hers, asking permission. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other's shapes. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and gentleness gave way to something fiercer. Something that had been building since that first night on the terrace, when he'd looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten how to ask. She tasted brandy and desperation, and something sweeter underneath. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of love. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. That was, he started. Unwise, she finished. Completely unwise. Probably. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I find I don't care. Your grandmother will. My grandmother will have to adapt. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I meant what I said earlier. When this is over, you'll be free. But Sorrel, I'm hoping you'll choose to stay. Not because you have to, because you want to. It was everything she'd been afraid to hope for, and it terrified her. We should return to the ball, she said, stepping back. Before someone notices we're both missing. His expression flickered. Disappointment, understanding, patience. Of course. But as they walked back toward the glittering chaos below, his hand found hers in the darkness. And she didn't let go. The summons came at dawn. Sorrel hadn't slept. How could she, with the memory of Tavish's kiss burning on her lips and the weight of impending disaster pressing on her chest? She'd lain awake in her beautiful borrowed bed, staring at shadows that seemed to mock her hopes. When the maid knocked at 5 a.m. with word that the dowager required her presence immediately, Sorrel knew. The end had come. She dressed quickly, choosing the simplest of her borrowed gowns. Dove gray, appropriate for either a funeral or a dismissal. The cameo brooch she left on her dressing table. If she was being sent away, she wouldn't compound the humiliation by wearing his gift. The dowager's private sitting room was cold, despite the fire blazing in the hearth. Letitia Sinclair sat in her customary chair, like a queen on a throne, but her face showed every one of her 70 years. The night had aged her. "Close the door," she said without preamble. "Sit." Sorrel obeyed. "My sister-in-law has left for London," the dowager began. "She departed an hour ago, claiming urgent business, though we both know she's running to spread her version of last night's events before any damage control can be mounted." "I'm sorry, Your Grace." "Are you?" The dowager's eyes narrowed. "You seemed quite composed during the confrontation, almost as if you'd been prepared for it." "I was as shocked as anyone." "Were you?" She leaned forward. "Or had my grandson already warned you what was coming? Already recruited you to his cause with pretty words and promises of freedom?" Her chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "The Duke told me about the Caribbean records, about his father's wishes, about his plans for restitution. He did not warn me that your sister-in-law would use that information to attack us both publicly." "Us both." The dowager smiled without warmth. "How intimate." "Tell me, Miss Ashwell, did my grandson kiss you last night?" The bluntness of the question struck like a blow. Sorrel's face flooded with heat. "I see." The dowager nodded slowly. "So he's compromised you. Charming. That certainly simplifies matters." "Nothing is compromised. Everything is compromised." The old woman's voice cracked with sudden fury. "Do you understand what you've done? What he's done? 50 years I've spent building this family's position, protecting our secrets, ensuring that the Ashworth name remained synonymous with power and respectability. And in one night, one foolish, idealistic, catastrophically naive night, my grandson has torn it all apart. He was trying to do what's right. Right? The Dowager laughed bitterly. "There is no right in our world, Miss Ashwell. There is only power and the appearance of virtue. You can have both if you're clever. My grandson has chosen to sacrifice the appearance, and in doing so, he's sacrificed everything else as well." She rose, moving toward the window, her back to Sorrel. "Lady Margrave will spread her poison throughout London. By week's end, we'll be the subject of every drawing room conversation. The families who attended last night will distance themselves. They must, to protect their own reputations. Invitations will dry up. Alliances will crumble. The Ashworth name will become synonymous with scandal and self-destruction. Unless someone takes the blame." The Dowager turned. Something sharp glittered in her eyes. "Go on." Sorrel's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to continue. "If the family needs a scapegoat, if you need someone to carry the weight of this scandal, I'm the obvious choice. The fortune hunter who manipulated her way into a duke's confidence. The ambitious nobody who turned him against his family. Society would believe it. They want to believe it. You're offering yourself as sacrifice? I'm offering a solution." Sorrel stood, meeting the Dowager's gaze directly. "Let me leave. Let it be known that the Duke discovered my scheming and cast me out. His reputation recovers. Your family name is protected. Everyone gets what they want. Everyone except her." But when had she ever gotten what she wanted? The Dowager studied her for a long moment, expression unreadable. "You love him," she said finally. "That's why you're offering this. Don't bother denying it. I've seen the way you look at each other, the way he reached for your hand when Margrave attacked, the way you stepped toward him rather than away when the crowd turned hostile." She shook her head slowly. "Love is such a useless emotion. It makes people do the most idiotic things. Perhaps. But it also makes them brave." "Does it?" The Dowager's smile was sharp. "Let's test that theory. Here is my counteroffer, Miss Ashwell. You will leave Ashworth Manor today. You will return to London and accept a position I've already arranged. Companion to the Marchioness of Whitbury, a deaf elderly woman who lives in near total seclusion. You will remain in that position for 1 year. And if I refuse? Then I will ensure your brother's debts are called in immediately, all of them. He'll be in debtor's prison by week's end, and you will have no resources to save him." The world tilted. "You've been watching him?" "I've been watching everyone. It's how I've survived this long." The Dowager moved closer, her voice dropping. 1 year, Miss Ashwell. That's all I ask. 1 year of separation, during which my grandson will come to his senses, and this scandal will fade from memory. If, at the end of that year, you both still feel as you do now, well, perhaps we can revisit the situation. It was manipulation dressed as compromise, a trap baited with false hope. But what choice did she have? My brother stays safe. Your brother stays safe. His debts will even be quietly managed, reduced to something he can actually repay. And Tavish, the Duke, you'll tell him I left willingly? I'll tell him whatever necessary to prevent him from doing something reckless, like chasing after you and creating an even larger scandal. The Dowager's eyes were hard. This is the best option available, Miss Ashwell, for everyone. Sorrel's vision blurred. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of this woman who held all the cards. May I write him a letter? You may write whatever you wish. I'll see that it's delivered. The lie was smooth, practiced. Both of them knew the letter would never reach him. Then we have an agreement. Excellent. Mrs. Compton will help you pack. A carriage will be ready within the hour. The Dowager turned back to the window, dismissing her. Goodbye, Miss Ashwell. I hope, for your sake, the year passes quickly. she packed in a daze. The beautiful gowns she left behind, the jewelry, the accessories, everything borrowed. She kept only her original clothes, her single worn valise, and, hidden at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, the cameo brooch she'd sworn to leave. She couldn't explain why she took it. Perhaps because leaving it felt like severing the last thread connecting her to him. Perhaps because she needed proof that any of this had been real. The letter took 6 attempts. Your Grace, I'm leaving. Please don't look for me. What happened between us was beautiful, but it cannot last. I see that now. Your grandmother is right. I don't belong in your world. I never did. Please continue your work. What you're trying to do matters more than either of us. The truth deserves to be told, regardless of what it costs. I will never forget your kindness. Sorrel, she sealed it with shaking hands and gave it to Mrs. Compton, knowing it would likely end up in the fire. The carriage was waiting. Corinna was nowhere to be seen, locked in her chambers perhaps, or deliberately kept away. Tavish was still asleep, unaware that his world was about to empty. Sorrel climbed into the carriage, pressed her hand against the window as Ashworth Manor shrank behind her, and finally allowed herself to weep. The Marchioness of Whitbury was precisely as the Dowager had promised. Deaf, elderly, and utterly isolated. Her townhouse in a forgotten corner of London saw no visitors, no balls, no parties, no social engagements of any kind. Sorrel's duties consisted of reading aloud, pointlessly since the Marchioness couldn't hear, managing household correspondence, and sitting in silence for hours while the old woman stared out rain-streaked windows. It was purgatory, dressed in respectable clothing. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 5. Sorrel moved through her days like a ghost, performing her duties with mechanical precision, while her mind wandered constantly to Ashworth Manor, to the library where she'd kissed a duke, to the ballroom where she'd stood her ground, to the terrace where everything had changed. She received no letters, no word from Corinna, no sign that anyone at Ashworth remembered she existed. The Dowager had been thorough. On the 6th week, her brother appeared. Jonathan Ashwell looked better than she'd seen him in years. Cleaner, healthier, something approaching purpose in his eyes. He stood in the Marchioness's parlor, turning his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the surroundings. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting. "Thank you. Your concern is touching. I mean it." He moved closer, studying her face. "You've lost weight. You're pale. You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks." "I'm fine, Jonathan. The position is quiet, which suits me." "The position is a prison." His voice sharpened. "I've been asking questions, Sorrel, about the Dowager, about the arrangement, about why you suddenly vanished from the grandest estate in England without a word to anyone." Her heart stuttered. "You shouldn't be asking questions. Someone has to. The Duke has been tearing London apart looking for you. Did you know that?" The room tilted. "What?" "He arrived 2 weeks after you left, showed up at the old flat, demanded to know where you'd gone. I didn't know. You hadn't told me anything. He looked—" "I've never seen a man look that desperate." Jonathan shook his head. "He said you vanished, that his grandmother claimed you'd left willingly, but he didn't believe it. He's been searching ever since." Sorrel sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "He's still looking?" "He hired investigators, paid them handsomely from what I gather. One of them tracked me down last week through the Marchioness's household accounts." Jonathan pulled a letter from his jacket. "He asked me to deliver this, said it was urgent." The letter was sealed with the Ashworth crest. Sorrel stared at it like it might catch fire. "Open it," Jonathan urged. "Whatever's in there, you need to read it." Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. "Sorrel, My grandmother told me you left willingly. She showed me a letter in your handwriting, saying you'd realized you didn't belong in my world. I don't believe it. The words were yours, but the choice wasn't. I know you, Sorrel. Perhaps better than I have any right to claim after so short an acquaintance. You wouldn't run from difficulty. You've never run from anything in your life. I've spent weeks searching for you, every day since I discovered you were gone. I've called in favors, hired investigators, and threatened my grandmother with consequences I'm not proud of. And now, I finally know where you are. I'm not asking you to come back for me. I'm asking you to come back for yourself, because the woman I kissed in that library deserves better than exile for the crime of being loved by the wrong man. I'll be at the Thornbury Inn tomorrow evening. If you want this, if you choose this, meet me there. If you don't come, I'll understand. I'll never contact you again. But please, Sorrel, choose. Yours, Tavish. She read it 3 times before the words sank in. He'd found her. He was still fighting. He was asking her to choose. Well? Jonathan was watching her intently. What does it say? He wants me to meet him tomorrow evening. She looked up, tears streaming. He's asking me to choose. What's stopping you? The Dowager. She threatened your debts, Jonathan. She said if I didn't stay away, my debts are settled. Jonathan sat beside her, taking her hands. That's what I came to tell you. The Duke paid them. All of them. Anonymously. But I found out who was behind it. He did it weeks ago, before he even found you. Just in case. The breath left her body. He removed every weapon she had, Jonathan continued. Every piece of leverage. The only thing keeping you here now is fear. Fear. The constant companion of her life. The thing that had shaped every choice, every sacrifice, and every dream deferred. What if I go and it all falls apart? What if his grandmother is right and I don't belong there? Then at least you'll know. Jonathan squeezed her hands. But Sorrel, you spent years keeping our family afloat. You've worked and sacrificed and denied yourself anything resembling happiness. Don't you think just once you deserve to fight for something you actually want? She thought of her mother, who'd worked until her hands bled, her father, who'd surrendered to shame rather than face his failures, a lifetime of playing it safe, of accepting what was offered, of never reaching for more. Tomorrow evening, she whispered. Tomorrow evening. She was going to meet him, and this time, she was going to choose. The Thornbury Inn was modest by aristocratic standards, a respectable coaching house on the road between London and the countryside, frequented by traveling merchants and minor gentry. Tavish had chosen it deliberately. Sorrel found him in the private parlor, pacing before the fireplace like a caged animal. When she entered, he stopped mid-stride, and the naked relief on his face nearly undid her. You came. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped. I didn't know. He crossed to her in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. Are you all right? Did she hurt you? The Marchioness position. I only discovered it 2 weeks ago, if I'd known sooner. I'm fine. She reached up, touching his face the way she'd wanted to for 6 endless weeks. I'm here. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might vanish if he loosened his grip. She felt him shaking, this powerful, controlled man, trembling against her like a leaf in wind. I thought I'd lost you, he said into her hair. I thought she'd finally won. She nearly did. Sorrel pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Your grandmother is formidable. My grandmother is a manipulative, cold-hearted, and utterly ruthless. He stopped, collecting himself. She's my grandmother, and I love her, despite everything. But I will never forgive her for what she did to you. She did what she thought was necessary to protect the family, to protect you. By exiling the woman I love? His voice cracked on the word. That's not protection. That's control. The woman I love. He'd said it, out loud, without hesitation. Tavish. Let me finish. He took her hands, holding them between his own. I need you to understand something, Sorrel. Something I should have told you before. Something that might change how you see all of this. Her heart stuttered. What do you mean? The night of the selection, when I chose you over all those noble daughters. He took a breath. It wasn't random. And it wasn't just because I'd been watching you, though I had been. Then why? Because I'd seen you before. Years ago, when I was 17, and you were 15. Your father had just lost everything. My father brought me to Thornbury, your family home, to teach me about the consequences of careless wealth. The world stopped. What? He wanted me to understand that fortune was fragile, that families could fall from grace in an instant. So he showed me one that had. Tavish's grip tightened on her hands. You were standing in the garden when we arrived, helping your mother pack what little you could take. You were crying, but you were also working, carrying boxes twice your size, refusing to let anyone help. Your father sat on a bench, useless with grief. Your brother was throwing stones at a window. But you kept going, even when it was hopeless. Sorrel couldn't breathe. I asked my father who you were. He said you were nobody now. That's how society would see you. A fallen family, best forgotten. Tavish's voice roughened, but I couldn't forget. For years, I wondered what happened to the girl who kept working when everything crumbled around her. You remembered me, all this time? I looked for you, quietly through investigators. Lost track of you when you became a companion. You kept moving, different positions, different families. Then my grandmother announced the selection, and Lady Philomena's name appeared on the guest list, and I discovered she employed a companion, a woman from Thornbury. He shook his head. It felt like fate, the universe finally answering a question I'd been asking for a decade. Tears spilled down Sorrel's cheeks. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to feel obligated. Didn't want you to think this was about some childhood fascination. He released her hands to cup her face. By the time I found you again, you were so much more than a memory. You were brave and sharp and real. You challenged me. You saw through me. You made me want to be worthy of the man my father hoped I'd become. Tavish, I love you, Sorrel Ashwell. Not because of who you were or who I thought you'd be. Because of who you are. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice by coming here tonight. She kissed him. It was the only possible response, the only way to express the tangle of emotion choking her throat. He pulled her close, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. Your grandmother will never accept this, she whispered against his lips. She already has. Sorrel pulled back, startled. What? That's the other thing I needed to tell you. Something like a smile crossed his face. After you disappeared, I may have caused some difficulties for her, threatened to expose every questionable dealing she's made in the past 30 years. Informed her that if you weren't found safely, I would burn the Ashworth name to the ground myself. You threatened your own grandmother. I learned from the best. His smile widened. She's not happy, but she's agreed to accept my choice. Publicly, officially, without interference. On one condition, which is that we marry immediately, before the season ends, before any more scandal can attach to the family name. Sorrel's heart stopped. Marry? I know it is fast. I know we've barely had time to know each other properly. But Sorrel. He took her hands again, his expression earnest. I've been waiting for you since I was 17 years old. I don't want to wait anymore. This is madness. Yes. Your family will resent me. Some of them. Not Corinna. Not the ones who matter. Society will talk. Let them talk. I'll give them something worth talking about. She laughed despite herself, a wet, desperate sound. You're impossible. I'm in love. Same thing, really. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his jacket. Sorrel Ashwell, you fell into my life like a storm I didn't know I needed. You challenged everything I thought I wanted. You made me brave enough to fight for what matters. Will you marry me? The ring inside was simple, elegant, a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. Say yes, he whispered. Please. She looked at this man kneeling before her, this duke who'd searched for her, fought for her, and loved her across years and obstacles, and a grandmother's machinations. Yes, she said, without question, without hesitation. Yes. The Ashworth Cathedral was the kind of ancient stone building that made commoners feel small. Sorrel had never imagined she'd be married here, never imagined she'd walk down an aisle older than her family's recorded history, wearing a gown of ivory silk and the Ashworth family diamonds, toward a man who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. Yet here she was. The pews were filled with contradictions. Society matrons who dismissed her as nobody just months ago, now forced to witness her become a duchess. Lady Margrave, conspicuously absent despite her invitation. Lady Philomena, present but pale with barely concealed fury. And scattered throughout, allies Sorrel had never expected. Bishop Alderton, who'd supported Tavish's declaration at the ball. The Marchioness of Whitbury, surprisingly mobile when properly motivated. A handful of other reformers who'd reached out since the scandal, eager to align themselves with the Ashworth cause. Corinna stood at the altar, grinning so widely it seemed her face might split. She'd insisted on being what she called the best woman, a role she'd invented specifically to annoy traditional wedding-goers. And at the center of it all, waiting with obvious impatience, stood Tavish. He'd argued for a small wedding, private, intimate, just family and close friends. Sorrel had overruled him. You chose me in front of 300 witnesses, she'd said. I want to marry you in front of 500 more. Let them see exactly what they're dealing with. Now, walking toward him on her brother's arm, she understood why she'd insisted. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration. A reversal of everything society had decided about her, about them, about what was possible for a merchant's daughter and a duke. Jonathan released her at the altar with a kiss on her cheek and a whispered, "Proud of you." Then it was just her and Tavish, standing before the bishop, the weight of history pressing down around them. Dearly beloved, Bishop Alderton began, his voice carrying through the vaulted space. We are gathered here to witness the union of Tavish Edmund Sinclair, Duke of Ashworth, and Sorrel Catherine Ashwell. The vows blurred past. Sorrel heard herself speaking the traditional words, to have and to hold, for better or worse. But her attention was fixed on Tavish's face, the wonder in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he slid the ring onto her finger, the way his voice cracked, just slightly, when he said, "I do." Then it was done. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Bishop Alderton declared. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Tavish didn't need to be told twice. The kiss was thorough, entirely inappropriate for a cathedral, and received with a mixture of scandalized gasps and delighted applause. When they finally broke apart, Sorrel was flushed, breathless, and grinning like a fool. "That," Corinna announced loudly, "was the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed. I may faint. Please don't, Tavish said dryly. We've only just finished the ceremony. Fainting would steal your sister-in-law's thunder. Sister-in-law? The word sent a thrill through Sorrel. She had a family again, not just Jonathan, struggling along in London. A real family. Complicated. Difficult. But hers. The wedding breakfast was held at Ashworth Manor, now decorated within an inch of its life with flowers and ribbons and every luxury the household could muster. Sorrel moved through the celebration in a daze, accepting congratulations from people who'd sneered at her weeks ago, making small talk with aristocrats who'd called her a fortune hunter. And everywhere she went, Tavish was at her side, his hand at her back, his eyes finding hers across crowded rooms, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't performing anymore. This was real. You're handling this magnificently, he murmured during a rare moment alone. Most new duchesses spend their first day in tears. Most new duchesses didn't spend years navigating Lady Philomena's mood swings. Sorrel smiled. Society ladies are considerably less frightening when you've survived her. Speaking of whom, Tavish nodded toward the entrance, where Lady Philomena was making a dramatic exit. It seems our least favorite guest is departing. Good riddance. Bloodthirsty, I approve. He pulled her closer. Dance with me. Here? Now? No one will mind if the bride and groom start the dancing early. He was already guiding her toward the center of the room. Besides, I've been waiting all day to hold you properly. The orchestra, taking their cue, shifted into a waltz. Around them, guests cleared a space, watching with the same fascination they'd shown at the Ashworth ball. But this time, the attention felt different. Not hostile, not judgmental. Celebratory. They're staring, Sorrel murmured. Let them. Tavish's grip tightened at her waist. Let them see how a man looks at his wife. They danced, and for the first time in her life, Sorrel didn't count the steps or worry about missteps. She simply followed his lead, trusting him completely. I have a wedding gift for you, he said as they turned. Something I've been working on since you agreed to marry me. Another brooch? More poetry? Something more permanent. His eyes sparkled. I've established a foundation in your name, the Ashwell Trust. It will fund education and support for families who've lost everything. Merchants' daughters, fallen gentry, anyone who's been told they're nobody now. Sorrel's breath caught. Tavish, you taught me that strength isn't about where you start. It's about what you do when everything crumbles. He pulled her closer, his voice dropping. I want to spend our lives proving that to others. Together. She kissed him right there, in the middle of the dance floor, in front of 500 witnesses who would gossip about it for months. She didn't care. The celebration continued past midnight. When the last guests finally departed, Sorrel stood in the entrance hall of Ashworth Manor, her home now properly, and watched the carriages disappear into the darkness. Tired? Tavish appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Exhausted, exhilarated, terrified. She accepted a glass. Take your pick. All 3, then. He clinked his glass against hers. Welcome home, Your Grace. Your Grace. She was a duchess. A duchess. The word still felt foreign. But Tavish's hand was warm in hers. The manor glowed with light behind them. And somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing in the new day. She belonged here. Finally, impossibly, she belonged. 1 year later. The Ashworth selection had become something entirely different. Where once the grand ballroom had hosted scheming mothers and eligible daughters, now it served as the annual gathering of the Ashwell Trust, a celebration of families rebuilt, futures restored, dreams reclaimed. Sorrel moved through the crowd, greeting guests who'd once been desperate and were now thriving. Your Grace, a young woman curtsied, her eyes bright with nervous excitement. I wanted to thank you personally. The scholarship allowed me to complete my studies. I've been offered a teaching position in Somerset. That's wonderful news, Miss Barton. Sorrel squeezed her hand. Your letters were beautifully written. I knew you'd find your path. Because of you. Because someone finally believed in me. The words echoed through Sorrel's chest. Someone believed in me. How many times had she wished for that in the years before Tavish? Now she could offer it to others. You're doing that thing again. Tavish appeared at her elbow, champagne flutes in hand. The thing where you forget to eat because you're too busy saving lives. I'm not saving lives. I'm having conversations. Same thing, sometimes. He handed her a glass. Corinna sent word. She's bringing the ambassador's son to the summer ball. Apparently they met at a gallery opening and she's moderately smitten. Moderately? Her exact words. Though she also included 17 exclamation points, so I suspect she's underselling it. Sorrel laughed, a free, easy sound that still surprised her sometimes. A year of happiness, and she was still learning how to accept it without waiting for the other shoe to drop. The Dowager asked about you, Tavish continued, something careful entering his voice. Did she? She wants to visit, for the baby's christening. Sorrel's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat but no longer empty. They'd received confirmation just last week. An heir, or heiress. Sorrel didn't much care which, due to arrive in autumn. She can come, Sorrel said slowly, if she can behave. I made that very clear in my response. Tavish pulled her closer. She's mellowed since the wedding. I think she's finally accepted that the family survived her grandson's reckless idealism. More than survived. Thrived. Sorrel looked around the ballroom filled with laughter and music and people who'd been given second chances. Your father would be proud. Something soft crossed Tavish's face. I found another letter last week, hidden in the binding of his favorite book, the Doniote volume he used to read every evening. It was addressed to my future daughter-in-law. Her heart clenched. What did it say? That he hoped I'd find someone who made me brave, someone who saw the weight I carried and helped me put it down instead of adding to it. His eyes met hers. He knew I'd need someone extraordinary. I think somehow, he knew it would be you. Tears pricked at Sorrel's eyes. The old Duke's ghost had walked these halls alongside them all year. In the reforms Tavish implemented, the foundation they'd established, the truth finally spoken aloud after generations of silence. I wish I could have met him, she whispered. You did meet him. In every book he collected, every note he left in the margins, every piece of this house he loved. Tavish pressed a kiss to her forehead. He's still here, and he approves. The music shifted to a waltz. Around them, couples moved onto the dance floor. Trustees and scholars, reformers and dreamers, all brought together by a vision that had started with grief and guilt and grown into something beautiful. Dance with me, Tavish said. Again? We danced at our wedding. We danced at the summer ball. We danced at the autumn gala. And we'll dance at every event until we're too old to stand. He pulled her toward the floor. It's tradition now. She followed him willingly, letting the music carry them as it had a dozen times before. His hand at her waist, her palm pressed to his, their bodies moving together with the ease of long practice. Happy, he murmured. She thought about the question. Thought about the girl she'd been, exhausted, invisible, certain that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. More than I ever imagined, she said. And somehow, every single day, more than the day before. He kissed her then, right there on the dance floor, and somewhere above them, she could have sworn she heard church bells ringing. Not for an ending, for a beginning.